this episode, we bring together several ideas that can sound unrelated when a beginner first hears them. Governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, may sound like policy and oversight. Redundancy may sound like backup systems. Awareness may sound like training, and metrics may sound like reporting for managers. The deeper truth is that these are not separate security islands. They are parts of one practical way of thinking that helps an organization decide what matters, protect what matters, keep operating when disruption happens, teach people how to behave responsibly, and notice when conditions are improving or drifting in the wrong direction. Once you hear them as one connected system, governance stops sounding like paperwork and starts sounding like organized judgment. That matters because real security does not succeed through one strong tool or one careful team alone. It succeeds when direction, resilience, human behavior, and visible measurement all support each other in a way that keeps the organization steady under both normal pressure and unexpected trouble. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful place to start is with the phrase practical governance thinking, because it points to the real goal of the whole topic. Governance is not only about who signs policies or who attends review meetings. Practical governance means the organization has a clear enough way of thinking that it can make responsible choices repeatedly instead of reacting differently every time something changes. It means people know what priorities matter, what risks deserve attention, what controls support continuity, what behaviors are expected from staff, and what information leaders should review before deciding whether the program is healthy or weakening. A beginner should picture governance less like a filing cabinet and more like a steering system. A steering system does not do the driving by itself, but it helps keep direction clear and helps the organization correct course when something starts to drift. That is why GRC, redundancy, awareness, and metrics belong together. They each support a different part of the steering process, and without that connection, the organization tends to move in fragments instead of as one disciplined whole. GRC provides the broad structure that makes the rest of the discussion easier to understand. Governance gives direction, ownership, and decision authority. Risk helps the organization identify what could cause meaningful harm and decide where limited effort should go first. Compliance helps ensure that legal, contractual, regulatory, and internal obligations are being respected instead of forgotten or assumed. When beginners hear those three ideas together, it becomes much easier to see why they matter to everyday security rather than only to audit season or executive reporting. GRC tells the organization what it is trying to protect, what expectations apply, who is responsible, and what level of uncertainty requires action. Without that structure, redundancy may be added in random places, awareness may become generic and disconnected from role, and metrics may become a pile of numbers with no shared meaning. GRC creates the decision frame. The other topics in this episode become much more useful once that frame is strong enough to guide them. Redundancy fits into governance thinking because resilience is not just a technical design choice. It is a business decision about what the organization refuses to leave exposed to a single point of failure. If a critical service depends on one system, one person, one location, or one fragile workflow, then governance should notice that concentration of dependence and decide whether it is acceptable. That means redundancy is not merely an engineering preference for extra capacity. It is a way of protecting mission continuity by ensuring that important operations do not collapse when the primary path disappears. A beginner should hear this clearly because it changes the meaning of backup thinking. The question is not simply do we have a spare copy of something. The better question is whether the organization has chosen, deliberately and responsibly, to provide another workable path when the first path fails. Governance makes that choice visible. Risk explains why the choice matters. Compliance may shape what continuity expectations are required. Redundancy then becomes one of the practical ways those decisions are expressed in real operations. Awareness belongs in the same conversation because governance is not only about systems and documents. It is also about how people behave when they are busy, pressured, uncertain, or confronted with something unusual. An organization may have strong policies and technical controls, yet still remain exposed if employees do not know how to recognize suspicious requests, protect sensitive information, report concerns, or follow secure processes during routine work. That means awareness is not a side program running in parallel to governance. It is one of the ways governance becomes human behavior. If leaders say risk matters, then awareness teaches staff how that truth affects daily action. If governance says access should be limited, awareness helps people understand why sharing credentials or bypassing review creates real exposure. If continuity matters, awareness helps staff know how to respond when the usual tool or process becomes unavailable. Beginners benefit from this connection because it shows that culture and training are not softer topics sitting outside security. They are part of how governance reaches the people whose choices determine whether the organization's rules remain alive in practice. Metrics complete the picture because an organization cannot govern responsibly if it cannot see whether its decisions are actually working. Direction without visibility becomes guesswork. A policy may exist, redundancy may be funded, and awareness messages may be delivered, but leaders still need evidence that critical systems remain resilient, that staff behavior is improving, that reviews are happening on time, and that risk is not quietly growing in areas that matter. This is where metrics become practical rather than abstract. A useful metric helps the organization answer whether an important expectation is being met, whether a weakness is recurring, or whether a trend deserves attention before it becomes more harmful. For a beginner, the key lesson is that metrics are not mainly about proving that work was done. They are about revealing whether the work created a safer and more dependable condition. Once you hear metrics this way, they become part of governance thinking because they help leaders steer. They show where the organization is steady, where it is drifting, and where stronger follow-through is needed. One reason these four areas belong together is that each one can fail quietly when it is isolated from the others. GRC without redundancy can produce policies and risk discussions that never translate into actual resilience when something breaks. GRC without awareness can produce rules that employees do not understand, do not remember, or do not feel supported in following. GRC without metrics can produce confident language without any reliable way to tell whether the program is actually improving. On the other side, redundancy without governance may protect the wrong things or receive inconsistent investment. Awareness without governance may sound inspiring, but remain too generic to change behavior in the places of highest risk. Metrics without governance may create charts that no one knows how to interpret or act on. For beginners, this is one of the most useful mental shifts in the topic. Strong security thinking does not merely collect good ideas. It connects them so that structure, resilience, behavior, and visibility reinforce one another instead of competing for attention or operating in separate silos. A simple organizational example can help make this connection more concrete. Imagine an organization that depends heavily on an online customer service platform. GRC helps determine that the platform is important to mission delivery, that customer information must be handled according to defined obligations, and that leadership expects downtime and privacy exposure to be minimized. Redundancy then asks whether the platform has alternate capacity, backup communications, protected data recovery, and enough process flexibility that essential service can continue if the primary system fails. Awareness asks whether staff know how to handle customer data, report suspicious messages, shift to alternate procedures during disruption, and avoid improvising in ways that create more harm. Metrics then show whether recovery steps are tested, whether staff reporting is timely, whether outages are getting shorter or longer, and whether known weaknesses remain unresolved. None of these pieces alone gives the full picture. Together, they create practical governance thinking because leadership can see the risk, guide the response, reinforce the behavior, and measure whether the chosen protections are actually holding. Ownership becomes much clearer when these topics are connected. Governance asks who is responsible for decisions, risk treatment, and policy direction. Redundancy asks who owns continuity planning for critical systems, people, and processes. Awareness asks who reinforces expectations, who communicates them, and who supports reporting and learning. Metrics ask who collects meaningful information, who reviews it, and who is accountable for action when the numbers show drift or weakness. Beginners often think security problems are mostly technical failures, but many of them are really ownership failures hidden behind technical symptoms. A backup exists, but no one validates it. Training exists, but no manager reinforces it. A dashboard exists, but no leader asks hard questions when the same issue appears month after month. Practical governance thinking reduces that drift by making ownership visible across the full chain. It helps the organization move from someone should handle this to a much stronger posture of this person or team owns this condition, reviews this evidence, and is expected to respond when the situation changes. It also helps to think of this connection as a repeating cycle instead of a one-time design effort. Governance sets direction and expectations. Risk analysis identifies where failure, disruption, or human weakness would matter most. Redundancy decisions provide alternate paths where the organization cannot afford fragile dependence. Awareness efforts help people understand how their daily behavior supports those decisions. Metrics then show whether the environment remains aligned with the plan or whether attention is slipping. That information feeds back into governance, where leaders can revise priorities, assign resources, or tighten expectations based on what the evidence shows. This cycle matters because security conditions do not stay frozen. New systems are adopted, employees change roles, workloads shift, vendors change, and threat patterns evolve. A beginner should see that the real strength of governance is not that it writes one perfect policy. Its real strength is that it creates a repeatable way to observe, decide, reinforce, and adjust as the environment changes over time. Metrics become especially valuable when they are tied to the right kinds of questions. An organization may measure whether continuity tests occurred, but it should also ask whether the tests revealed meaningful gaps. It may measure awareness completion, but it should also ask whether suspicious activity reporting is improving or whether repeated user mistakes are clustering in one area. It may measure open risk items, but it should also ask whether the oldest or most serious ones are truly moving toward resolution. This is where a key risk indicator, KRI, can help, because a KRI highlights conditions that may signal rising exposure before a larger incident occurs. If backup validation is overdue for critical systems, if staff response to unusual requests is slowing, or if unresolved exceptions are increasing in sensitive business functions, those patterns may reveal more than simple activity counts ever could. Beginners should hear this clearly because it protects them from the mistake of treating every number as equally useful. Good metrics support governance by revealing risk and performance in a way that helps action happen sooner and more intelligently. There is also a strong human side to this topic that beginners should not miss. Governance can feel formal, redundancy can feel technical, and metrics can feel numerical. But awareness reminds us that people are the ones who interpret signals, maintain systems, follow recovery steps, escalate issues, and decide whether to honor or bypass process during stressful moments. That means the organization needs a culture where people understand not only what the rules are, but why those rules connect to continuity, accountability, and risk reduction. If employees see backup testing as someone else's problem, awareness as a yearly training burden, and metrics as management noise, then governance will struggle to influence real behavior. A healthier culture helps staff understand that reporting quickly, following recovery steps carefully, protecting access, and respecting alternate procedures are all part of how the organization survives disruption responsibly. Practical governance thinking is therefore not just a leadership posture. It becomes a shared organizational habit when people at many levels understand how their actions connect to resilience and visible accountability. Trade-offs are another reason this integrated view matters. Organizations rarely have unlimited money, unlimited staff, or unlimited time, which means governance often involves deciding where extra redundancy is worth the cost, where awareness needs more role-specific attention, and which metrics truly deserve leadership review. Without an integrated approach, these trade-offs become distorted. A team might buy duplicate technology without training staff on how to use it during disruption. Another team might generate many reports without funding the redundancy needed to reduce the risk those reports keep highlighting. Another might deliver awareness messages broadly without focusing on the business areas where continuity failures would be most damaging. Practical governance thinking improves these decisions by keeping the questions connected. Where does the mission face the greatest exposure? Which single points of failure need stronger backup paths? Which groups need better preparation because their choices affect critical processes? Which measurements will reveal whether the investment is actually improving resilience and control? Beginners should notice that this is what mature security looks like. It does not solve each issue in isolation. It weighs them together. This way of thinking also helps with scenario-based judgment because many workplace situations are really asking whether the organization has connected its direction, resilience, people, and visibility effectively. If a scenario describes a critical process depending on one employee, one system, and one outdated procedure, the issue is not only technical weakness. It is a governance issue because redundancy, awareness, and oversight were not aligned. If a scenario describes recurring staff mistakes around sensitive information with no useful reporting trend or management response, the issue is not only training weakness. It is a governance issue because awareness and metrics were not connected to accountability. If a scenario describes repeated continuity failures with no evidence that leaders tracked or acted on the pattern, the issue is not only poor recovery design. It is a governance issue because metrics were not being used to steer. For beginners, this is a powerful lesson. Many security problems become easier to understand when you ask how GRC, redundancy, awareness, and metrics failed to support one another rather than looking for one isolated technical fault. As you grow more comfortable with the topic, the biggest insight to keep is that governance becomes practical when it shapes real choices before a crisis forces them. It asks which services deserve backup paths, which people need stronger awareness, which behaviors need reinforcement, and which trends must be visible to leadership long before the organization finds itself explaining why warning signs were missed. That kind of thinking supports steadier operations because it reduces the chance that the company is surprised by weaknesses that were already knowable. It also helps security feel more coherent to beginners. Instead of seeing policy, continuity, training, and reporting as separate chapters, you begin to see a connected management system that helps the organization decide, prepare, teach, and verify. That is the real value of connecting these ideas. It turns governance from something that sounds distant and formal into something deeply practical because it helps the organization keep risk visible, resilience real, behavior aligned, and performance measurable across the areas that matter most. As we close, remember that connecting GRC, redundancy, awareness, and metrics into practical governance thinking is really about turning security from scattered effort into organized judgment. GRC provides direction, ownership, and a structured way to think about obligation and risk. Redundancy protects essential operations from fragile dependence on single paths. Awareness helps people understand how their daily choices support continuity, protection, and accountability. Metrics make conditions visible so leaders can see whether expectations are being met and where risk may be growing. When these four areas are connected, the organization can plan more wisely, respond more steadily, and improve with less guesswork. That is why this topic matters so much for beginners. It shows that strong governance is not only about rules on paper. It is about making sure the organization knows what matters, protects what matters, teaches what matters, and measures what matters so that security becomes something visible, repeatable, and dependable in everyday practice.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.